Greg Hill's hand froze on the trigger as he stared at the alien female before him. His mission to eliminate Rigel, a high-ranking Evora strategist, evaporated in an instant. Instead of pulling the trigger, Greg felt an overwhelming urge to breed with her. Earth's military command had handpicked Greg for this critical assignment. As humanity teetered on the brink of defeat in its decades-long war against the aggressive Evora, Greg's exceptional combat skills and successful covert operations record made him the ideal candidate to turn the tide. For months, Greg underwent rigorous training, preparing his body and mind for the alien environment. He studied Evora physiology, mastering their weak points. The military outfitted him with cutting-edge weaponry and a stealth suit designed to bypass Evora security systems. Greg's infiltration began flawlessly. His cloaked shuttle landed undetected in a remote area near Rigel's compound. As he approached the facility, the alien terrain and atmosphere presented unexpected challenges. The gravity fluctuated unpredictably, and the air carried an acrid tang that threatened to overwhelm his suit's filters. Adapting quickly, Greg breached the compound's outer defenses. He moved like a shadow, evading Evora guards and security measures with ease. Each step deeper into the complex revealed new information about Evora technology and military capabilities. Greg filed these observations away, knowing they could prove invaluable for Earth's war effort. Finally, after navigating a labyrinth of corridors and security checkpoints, Greg located Rigel's private quarters. He readied his weapon, prepared to complete his mission, and potentially save humanity. But as the door slid open, revealing his target, Greg's world shifted. Rigel stood before him, her alien form exuding an otherworldly beauty that defied description. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent quality, and her eyes, deep pools of an unknown color, seemed to pierce through Greg's stealth suit and into his soul. In that moment, every ounce of Greg's training and determination crumbled. The weapon in his hand felt foreign, wrong. A primal instinct buried deep within his human DNA surged to the forefront of his mind. It screamed at him to approach Rigel, not as an assassin, but as a potential mate. Greg's body moved of its own accord. He lowered his weapon and took a step toward Rigel. The Evora female's eyes widened in terror and confusion. She had clearly expected death at the hands of this human intruder. Instead, she found herself faced with something entirely unexpected. As Greg closed the distance between them, Rigel's fear gave way to shock. She sensed the change in his demeanor, the shift from predator to something else entirely. The air crackled with tension and an inexplicable attraction that defied the enmity between their species. In this moment, suspended between war and peace, duty and desire, Greg and Rigel stood on the precipice of a decision that could reshape the future of both their races. The fate of two worlds now hinged not on the pull of a trigger, but on the potential union of sworn enemies. Greg's body moved on autopilot, closing the distance between himself and Rigel. The Evora female's terror melted into a mixture of confusion and intrigue as she observed the change in his demeanor. Her eyes, previously wide with fear, now narrowed in concentration as she studied the human before her. Rigel's extensive research into human biology suddenly proved invaluable. She recognized the telltale signs of human arousal: Greg's dilated pupils, the flush creeping up his neck, and his quickened breathing. This realization caused her to lower her guard slightly, her scientific curiosity piqued by this unprecedented turn of events. As Greg reached out to touch her, Rigel remained still, allowing the contact. The moment his fingers brushed against her iridescent skin, an unexpected biochemical reaction occurred. A subtle, sweet scent filled the air as pheromones were released, affecting both human and Evora alike. The pheromones intensified their mutual attraction, overriding years of ingrained hostility. Greg's touch became more insistent, his fingers tracing the alien contours of Rigel's form. She shivered at the contact, overwhelmed by sensations she had never experienced before. "This is not like Evora reproduction," Rigel murmured, her voice a mix of wonder and confusion. Greg's response was a low, husky chuckle. "No, it's not," he agreed, pulling her closer. What followed was a profound cultural exchange, as intimate as it was unexpected. Rigel, accustomed to the clinical and emotionless reproduction methods of her species, found herself swept away by the intensity and passion of human intimacy. Every touch, every kiss was a revelation, challenging everything she thought she knew about interspecies relations. As they explored this new territory together, Rigel's scientific mind struggled to process the flood of new information. The emotional connection, the physical pleasure. It was all so foreign, yet undeniably compelling. She found herself responding to Greg's touches with an enthusiasm that surprised them both. Their intimate encounter was abruptly interrupted by a blaring alarm that echoed through the compound. The harsh sound cut through their shared moment, instantly snapping them back to the reality of their situation. Rigel's eyes widened in realization. "The security systems," she gasped. "They've detected your genetic signature." Greg tensed, his hand instinctively moving towards his discarded weapon. But before he could reach it, Rigel made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She swiftly moved to a seemingly blank wall and pressed her hand against it. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a dark passage beyond. "This way," she urged, grabbing Greg's arm. "It's a secret escape route for high-ranking officials." Without hesitation, Greg followed her into the tunnel. As the panel slid shut behind them, plunging them into near darkness, he couldn't help but marvel at the turn of events. The alien he had come to assassinate was now risking everything to ensure his escape. As they navigated the winding passages, the sounds of the Evora guards searching the compound above them echoed faintly. The shared danger, combined with their recent intimacy, forged a unique bond between them. They moved in sync, communicating with subtle touches and glances, rather than words. After what felt like hours of tense silence, broken only by their careful footsteps and the distant sounds of pursuit, the tunnel opened into a small, concealed hangar. A sleek escape pod stood ready, its metallic surface gleaming in the dim light. Rigel immediately went to work, her fingers flying over the control panel as she prepared the pod for launch. Greg watched her, a newfound respect in his eyes. He realized the magnitude of what she was doing. By helping him escape and abandoning her post, she was committing treason against her own people. "Rigel," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to—" She cut him off with a sharp look. "I've made my choice, Greg. What we shared, it changes everything. This war, the hatred between our species, it's all based on ignorance and fear. We can be more than this." Just as the launch sequence initiated, the hangar door burst open with a thunderous bang. Commander Zax stormed in, flanked by a squad of Evora elite guards. The commander, a towering figure with battle scars crisscrossing his face, took in the scene before him with a mixture of shock and unbridled rage. "Rigel!" Zax's voice boomed through the hangar, causing both Greg and Rigel to flinch. "Explain yourself immediately." Rigel stepped forward, placing herself between Greg and the Evora forces. She stood tall, her chin raised defiantly as she addressed her superior. "Commander Zax, I can no longer support this war. There's potential for understanding between our species, for peace. What we've been told about humans, it's not the whole truth." As Rigel continued her impassioned speech, challenging the very foundations of Evora society, Greg's mind raced. He knew their chance of escape was dwindling with each passing second. His eyes darted around the hangar, finally landing on a control panel near the entrance. A plan formed in his mind, desperate and risky. As Rigel's words continued to hold Zax and the guards captivated, Greg inched towards the panel. His heart pounded in his ears, every movement feeling agonizingly slow and obvious. Yet the Evora remained focused on Rigel, their attention captured by her treasonous words. Greg's fingers hovered over the panel, ready to make a move that would either ensure their escape or doom them both. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. In that split second of hesitation, Greg made his move. His hands shot out, fingers flying across the control panel with practiced precision. The hangar erupted into chaos as heavy blast doors slammed down, cutting off Commander Zax and his squad from reinforcements. The sudden activation of the emergency lockdown protocol caught everyone off guard, but the moment of surprise was fleeting. Zax's face contorted with rage as he bellowed, "Open fire!" The air crackled with energy as the Evora guards unleashed a barrage of weapons fire. Greg's instincts kicked in, his body moving before his mind could process the danger. He dove behind a stack of nearby cargo containers, the smell of ozone filling his nostrils as energy bolts sizzled past. "Rigel!" Greg shouted, his eyes searching frantically for the Evora female. He spotted her a moment too late, caught in the open as she tried to reach cover. An energy bolt grazed her shoulder, the impact spinning her around and sending her stumbling. Without thinking, Greg broke from his position. He sprinted across the hangar floor, his heart pounding in his ears as he zigged and zagged to avoid the incoming fire. Reaching Rigel, he wrapped an arm around her waist and half-carried, half-dragged her behind the cargo containers. "Are you all right?" Greg asked, his voice tight with concern as he examined her wound. His eyes widened in surprise as he noticed a strange, bioluminescent fluid seeping from the injury. The otherworldly sight momentarily captivated him, the fluid pulsing with an ethereal light that seemed to move in sync with Rigel's rapid breathing. Rigel gritted her teeth, her alien features contorting in pain. "I'll survive," she hissed, "but we won't if we stay here much longer." As if to emphasize her point, the cargo container above them exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. The Evora guards were systematically destroying their cover, each blast bringing them closer to exposure. Greg's mind raced, searching for a way out of their predicament. He was about to suggest a desperate charge towards the escape pod when Rigel grabbed his arm, her eyes alight with sudden inspiration. "The maintenance shaft," she said, pointing to a small opening near the far wall. "It leads to the facility's power core. If we can reach it..." "We can create a diversion," Greg finished, immediately grasping her plan. He nodded, a grim smile crossing his face. "It's our best shot." Together they waited for a lull in the barrage of energy bolts. When it came, they exploded into action. Greg led the way, using every ounce of his training to weave a path through the chaos of the hangar floor. Rigel followed close behind, her injury slowing her down, but not stopping her. Energy bolts sizzled past them, close enough that Greg could feel the heat on his skin. The acrid smell of burning metal filled the air as stray shots impacted the hangar's equipment. Through it all, they pushed forward, driven by desperation and the knowledge that failure meant certain death. They reached the maintenance shaft, a claustrophobic opening barely large enough for one person. Greg turned to Rigel, his decision made in an instant. "You first," he said, helping her into the shaft. "You know the systems better than I do." Rigel nodded, understanding the logic even as concern flashed in her alien eyes. She began to squeeze into the tight space, wincing as the movement aggravated her shoulder wound. Greg was about to follow when a massive force slammed into him from behind. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Rolling over, he found himself face to face with Commander Zax, the Evora's features twisted with fury. "Traitor!" Zax roared, his multiple limbs lashing out in a flurry of strikes. Greg barely had time to raise his arms in defense before the assault began. Zax's superior strength and extra limbs gave him an immediate advantage, raining down blows that threatened to overwhelm the human assassin. But Greg was far from helpless. Years of training kicked in, his body moving on instinct to deflect and counter. He used Zax's momentum against him, redirecting powerful strikes to throw the Evora off balance. Where Zax had raw power, Greg countered with speed and adaptability. The two opponents grappled across the hangar floor, each landing punishing blows that would have incapacitated a lesser fighter. Greg tasted blood in his mouth, felt the sting of a dozen fresh bruises forming, but he pushed through the pain, driven by the knowledge that Rigel's life, and perhaps the future of human-Evora relations, depended on his survival. As they fought, Greg became acutely aware of the differences in their physiology. Zax's extra limbs allowed him to attack from multiple angles simultaneously, forcing Greg to constantly adapt his defense. The Evora's tough hide seemed to shrug off blows that would have stunned a human opponent. But Greg had surprises of his own. He employed techniques that Zax had clearly never encountered before, using leverage and joint manipulation in ways that the Evora's anatomy wasn't designed to counter. A well-placed elbow strike to a sensitive nerve cluster sent shockwaves of pain through Zax's system, momentarily staggering the alien commander. Seizing the opportunity, Greg maneuvered behind Zax and locked his arms around the Evora's throat in a chokehold. Zax thrashed wildly, his extra limbs flailing as he tried to dislodge the human. But Greg held on with relentless drive, tightening his grip as Zax's struggles began to weaken. The other Evora guards watched in stunned silence, their weapons trained on the pair but unable to fire for fear of hitting their commander. The standoff stretched on, seconds feeling like hours as Greg maintained his hold. Just as Zax's movements began to slow, a piercing alarm cut through the tension. Red emergency lights bathed the hangar in an eerie glow, pulsing in time with the blaring siren. "Greg!" Rigel's voice echoed from the maintenance shaft. "We need to go now." The power core was overloading. In mere moments, the entire facility would be engulfed in a massive explosion. The realization hit everyone simultaneously, instantly shifting priorities. Greg released his hold on Zax, shoving the disoriented commander away as he sprinted towards the escape pod. Behind him, he could hear Zax barking orders for his guards to evacuate. Rigel emerged from the maintenance shaft, her face pale with pain and exertion. Greg reached her just as she stumbled, catching her before she could fall. Together they half ran, half stumbled to the waiting escape pod. The pod's hatch sealed behind them with a hiss of pressurized air. Greg's fingers flew over the control panel, initiating the launch sequence as Rigel collapsed into one of the seats. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the small craft as it lifted off. They burst out of the hangar just as the first explosions began to rock the compound. The shockwave caught them, sending the pod tumbling through the alien atmosphere. Greg fought with the controls, struggling to stabilize their flight path as alarms blared warnings of system overloads and structural damage. As the violence of their escape subsided and the pod's systems began to normalize, Greg turned his attention to Rigel. Her wound was still glowing faintly, the strange bioluminescent fluid now mixed with a darker substance that Greg assumed was her species' equivalent of blood. "Let me take a look at that," he said, moving closer in the confined space of the pod. As he tended to her injury, using the pod's limited medical supplies, Greg couldn't help but be acutely aware of their proximity. The intensity of their earlier encounter came rushing back, tempered now by the gravity of their situation and the uncertainty of their future. Rigel winced as Greg applied a sealant to her wound, her eyes meeting his. "What have we done, Greg?" she asked softly, her voice a mix of wonder and trepidation. Greg paused, the full weight of their actions settling on him. They were now fugitives, wanted by both their species. Their choices had potentially altered the course of a war that had raged for decades. And yet, as he looked at Rigel, he couldn't bring himself to regret the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. "I don't know," he admitted, his hand lingering on her arm. "But whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As the pod stabilized its course, streaking away from the planet and into the vastness of space, Greg and Rigel sat in contemplative silence. They had crossed a line, thrown away their old lives for something new and unknown. The future stretched before them, full of danger and possibility in equal measure. The soft beeping of the pod's navigation system broke the silence, reminding them that they needed to decide on a destination. As Greg turned to the control panel, he knew that this was just the beginning of their journey. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as neither fully human nor Evora, but as something new, a bridge between two warring species, carrying with them the hope for a different future. The soft beeping of the pod's navigation system grew more insistent, drawing Greg's attention away from Rigel. He frowned as he studied the readouts, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Rigel asked, her voice tight with pain as she shifted in her seat. Greg's fingers flew over the controls, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The nav system's acting up. Must have taken more damage than we thought during our escape." The pod shuddered, the vibrations intensifying as Greg struggled to maintain their trajectory. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, bathing the cramped interior in an ominous red glow. "Can you stabilize it?" Rigel leaned forward, her alien features etched with concern. Greg shook his head, his face hardened. "I'm trying, but we're losing control. There's a planet ahead, uncharted, in neutral space. It might be our only option." Rigel's eyes widened as she took in the rapidly approaching planetoid on the monitor. Its surface was a patchwork of deep greens and murky browns, obscured by swirling cloud formations. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her hand gripping the edge of her seat. Greg's expression was grim as he input a series of commands. "No choice. Hang on tight. This is going to be rough." The pod plummeted through the planet's atmosphere, the hull glowing red-hot from the friction. Alarms blared as systems overloaded, sparks flying from damaged consoles. Greg fought with the controls, using every ounce of his training to guide their descent. They broke through the cloud cover, a dense canopy of alien vegetation rushing up to meet them. Greg pulled back hard on the controls, trying to level their approach, but it was too late. The pod smashed through the treetops, branches and strange flora shattering against the view screen. The impact threw Greg and Rigel forward, their restraints straining to hold them in place. A deafening screech of tearing metal filled the air as the pod carved a path through the alien forest. Greg's head slammed against the control panel, and darkness claimed him. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The acrid smell of burnt circuitry, a dull, throbbing pain in his skull, the taste of blood in his mouth. Greg forced his eyes open, blinking away the fog of unconsciousness. The pod's interior was dark, save for a few flickering emergency lights. Smoke hung in the air, stinging his eyes and throat. Greg turned his head, wincing at the movement, and saw Rigel slumped in her seat. "Rigel," he croaked, his voice hoarse. He reached out, shaking her arm gently. "Rigel, wake up." She stirred, a soft groan escaping her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, disorientation clear in her gaze. "Greg? Where are we?" "Crashed," Greg said, unbuckling his restraints with shaking hands. "We need to get out of here. The hull's breached, and I smell fuel." Together they stumbled from the wreckage, supporting each other as they navigated the twisted metal. The alien forest surrounded them, a riot of strange colors and unfamiliar shapes. Bioluminescent plants pulsed with an otherworldly glow, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Greg helped Rigel to a fallen log a safe distance from the crash site, then turned back to survey the damage. The pod was a mangled mess, its sleek lines reduced to a crumpled heap of metal. Tendrils of smoke rose from the wreckage, a stark reminder of their narrow escape. "How bad is it?" Rigel asked, cradling her injured shoulder. Greg shook his head, his expression grim. "Bad. We're not flying out of here anytime soon." He glanced up at the alien sky, visible in patches through the dense canopy. "No way to call for help, either. We're on our own." Rigel nodded, her alien features set in drive. "Then we adapt. Survive." Greg allowed himself a small smile, admiring her resilience. "Agreed. First things first. We need to salvage what we can from the pod and set up a camp. Night will be falling soon, and we don't know what kind of creatures might be out there." They worked quickly, Greg's military training and Rigel's knowledge of alien ecosystems, complementing each other as they established a makeshift camp. They used pieces of the pod's hull to create a crude shelter, gathering what supplies they could from the wreckage. As the alien sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in deep purples and blues, Greg and Rigel huddled around a small fire. The flames cast flickering shadows across their faces, highlighting the weariness etched in their features. "We should take turns keeping watch," Greg said, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond their camp. "No telling what might be out there." Rigel nodded, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "I'll take first watch. You need rest. That head wound looks nasty." Greg touched the gash on his forehead, wincing at the tenderness. He wanted to argue, to insist he was fine, but exhaustion burdened immensely on him. "Wake me in a few hours," he said, settling back against a fallen log. As he drifted off, Greg's last conscious thought was of the strange turn their lives had taken, from enemies to reluctant allies, and now stranded together on an alien world. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they'd face them together. He awoke to Rigel's urgent whisper. "Greg, wake up. Something's out there." Instantly alert, Greg sat up, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. In the dim light of their dying fire, he saw Rigel's tense posture, her alien eyes wide with alarm. A rustling in the underbrush drew his attention, glowing eyes peered at them from the darkness, accompanied by a low, chittering sound that sent chills down Greg's spine. As the creatures emerged into the firelight, he saw a nightmarish fusion of Earth's wolves and oversized insects. "What are they?" Greg whispered, slowly rising to his feet. Rigel shook her head, her voice tight with fear. "I've never seen anything like them. But they're predators, that much is clear." The pack of creatures circled their camp, their mandibles clicking in anticipation. Greg's mind raced, assessing their options. They were outnumbered and poorly armed, with only the wreckage of their pod for shelter. "Rigel," he said, his voice low and steady, "when I give the signal, run for the pod. I'll draw them off." She turned to him, her alien features twisted in a mixture of fear and persistence. "No, we face this together." As the creatures tensed to spring, Greg and Rigel stood back to back, ready to fight for their survival in this strange, unforgiving world. Greg tensed, ready to fight, when a blinding light suddenly illuminated the forest. The wolf-like creatures scattered, their chittering cries fading into the distance. Greg and Rigel shielded their eyes, squinting against the harsh glare. As their vision adjusted, they saw the source of the light, a massive spacecraft descending from the sky, its sleek form unlike anything they had encountered before. "We need to move," Greg said urgently, grabbing Rigel's arm. "Gather what we can and head for cover." They quickly collected their meager supplies and the alien technology they had discovered in the ruins. As they retreated into the denser parts of the forest, Greg's mind raced. Human? Evora? Or something entirely new? The spacecraft touched down in a clearing not far from their crashed escape pod, its hull gleaming in the alien moonlight. Greg and Rigel crouched behind a cluster of bioluminescent plants, observing as a hatch on the ship's side slid open with a soft hiss. 3 figures emerged, and Greg felt his breath catch in his throat. They were neither human nor Evora, but something wholly alien. Tall and slender, their iridescent skins shimmered with each movement. What caught Greg's attention most were their heads, elongated and adorned with multiple eyes arranged in a circular pattern. "What are they?" Rigel whispered, her voice a mix of awe and apprehension. Greg shook his head, unable to tear his gaze away from the alien visitors. "I've never seen anything like them in all my years of space travel." The aliens moved with fluid grace, approaching the wreckage of the escape pod. One of them produced a device that emitted a soft, pulsing light. As it swept the area, Greg realized it was some kind of scanner. Suddenly, the alien with the scanner turned in their direction, its multiple eyes focusing on their hiding spot. Greg tensed, ready to run, but the alien's reaction surprised him. Instead of aggression, it emitted a series of melodic tones that seemed almost welcoming. "I think they're trying to communicate," Rigel said, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. Greg nodded, his military training kicking in. "This could be a first contact scenario. We need to proceed carefully." He turned to Rigel, his expression serious. "I'm going to approach them. Stay hidden, just in case." Before Rigel could protest, Greg stood and slowly stepped out from their cover. He raised his hands in a universal gesture of peace, his heart pounding as he approached the alien trio. The lead alien, the one Greg mentally dubbed Melodious due to its musical speech, activated a device on its wrist. A holographic interface sprang to life between them, displaying a series of simple images and mathematical equations. Greg's mind raced as he interpreted the symbols. "They're peaceful explorers," he said aloud, more for his own benefit than anyone else's. "From a distant star system." Seeing that the interaction appeared non-hostile, Rigel emerged from hiding and joined Greg. The aliens' interest seemed to peak at the sight of them together, their eyes blinking in rapid succession. Melodious manipulated its device again, and suddenly a shimmering field enveloped them. Greg felt a tingling sensation wash over him, and when it passed, he found he could understand the alien's melodic speech. "Greetings, divergent beings," Melodious said, its voice a harmonious blend of tones. "We are members of the Galactic Coalition, dedicated to exploration and the preservation of unique life forms." Greg and Rigel exchanged glances, the weight of this revelation settling upon them. "We're honored to meet you," Greg replied cautiously. I'm Greg, a human, and this is Rigel, an Evora. The alien's eyes widened in what Greg interpreted as surprise. Human and Evora cooperating? Another alien asked. Our records indicate your species are at war. Rigel stepped forward, her scientific background evident in her eagerness to explain. We've discovered that our conflict is based on misunderstandings and manipulation. Our experiences together have shown us the possibility of peace. The aliens conferred among themselves, their melodic tones rising and falling in a complex symphony. Finally, Melodious turned back to Greg and Rigel. Your situation intrigues us, it said. We detected energy signatures from ancient ruins on this planet and came to investigate. We had not anticipated encountering representatives of two warring species working together. Greg saw an opportunity and seized it. The ruins contain technology that could change everything. We believe it could be the key to ending the war between our people. The alien's interest was palpable. We offer you a choice, Melodious said. Come with us to our homeworld. Present your case to the Galactic Coalition. We may be able to assist in brokering peace between your species. Greg and Rigel stared at each other, the magnitude of this offer sinking in. It was a chance to end the war, to save countless lives. But it also meant leaving behind everything they knew, potentially being labeled as traitors by their own people. As they grappled with this decision, a piercing alarm cut through the air. The aliens turned to their ship, their movements suddenly urgent. Multiple vessels approaching, one of them announced, human and Evora war fleets. Greg's blood ran cold. They had been tracked, probably from the energy signature of their crash pod. The human and Evora fleets were converging on their position, unaware of the momentous first contact taking place on the planet's surface. Melodious turned to them, its multi-eyed gaze intense. We cannot interfere directly in your conflict. It is against our highest laws. You must decide quickly. Come with us or face the arriving fleets. The sound of distant explosions reached them. The space battle had begun in the planet's orbit. Greg's mind raced, years of military training colliding with the newfound hope for peace. We can't just leave, he said, turning to Rigel. Not when we have a chance to stop this war. Rigel nodded, her expression determined. Agreed. But how can we reach both fleets before they destroy each other, and us? Greg's gaze fell on the alien technology they had salvaged from the ruins. An idea formed, dangerous and desperate, but possibly their only chance. We use this, he said, holding up the ancient device. If we can boost its power with your ship's systems, we might be able to broadcast a message to both fleets. Show them the truth, that there's a whole galaxy out there, and a peaceful way forward. The aliens conferred quickly, their melodic tones urgent. Melodious turned back to them. It is possible but risky. You would be exposing yourselves to great danger. Greg looked at Rigel, seeing his own persistence mirrored in her alien features. They had come too far, risked too much to back down now. We'll do it, Rigel said, her voice firm. As debris from the battle began to rain down around them, Greg and Rigel raced towards the alien ship, ancient technology in hand. They had one chance to change the course of the war, to open their people's eyes to a larger universe. The alien ship's hatch closed behind them as they entered, the interior humming with advanced technology beyond their comprehension. Greg and Rigel shared a look of commitment as they prepared to make their stand. Whatever came next, they would face it together, for themselves, for their people, and for the promise of a peaceful future among the stars. Stars. The ship's engines hummed to life, and in a blink it vanished from sight, leaving Greg and Rigel alone on the alien world once more. Greg turned to Rigel, his expression a mix of perseverance and uncertainty. We're really doing this, aren't we? Rigel nodded, her alien features set in tenacity. It's our best chance to end this war. We can't let this opportunity slip away. Without another word, they set to work. Greg's hands moved swiftly over the alien technology they'd salvaged from the ruins, his military training kicking in as he assessed its potential. Rigel stood beside him, her scientific mind already formulating ways to integrate their limited resources with the advanced alien tech. If we can boost the signal strength, Rigel mused, manipulating a series of crystalline components, we might be able to penetrate the shields of both fleets simultaneously. Greg nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. We'll need to modulate the frequency to match both human and Evora communication protocols. Can you handle that? Rigel's eyes lit up with a mix of excitement and challenge. Leave it to me. As they worked, the sky above them erupted in a dazzling, terrifying light show. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers, raining debris and casting eerie shadows across the alien landscape. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a grim reminder of the urgency of their task. Hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Greg's fingers ached from manipulating unfamiliar technology, while Rigel's voice grew hoarse from explaining complex Evora communication theories. Yet, despite their exhaustion, they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that every second counted. A deafening roar shattered their focus. Greg looked up to see a human scout ship, its hull blazing, plummeting towards the surface. The ship crashed less than a kilometer away, the impact sending a shockwave that nearly knocked them off their feet. We should check for survivors, Greg said, already moving towards the wreckage. Rigel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. You're right. We can't leave them out there. They approached the crash site cautiously, the heat from the smoldering wreckage searing their skin. A figure emerged from the twisted metal, stumbling and coughing. Hold it right there, a woman's voice rang out, followed by the distinctive whine of a plasma pistol powering up. Greg raised his hands slowly, stepping in front of Rigel. Easy there. We're here to help. The woman came into view, her flight suit torn and stained with blood. Despite her injuries, she held her weapon steady, her gaze locked on Rigel. Captain Sarah Russell, 5th Scout Division. She introduced herself, her voice tight with pain and suspicion. What the hell is going on here? Why are you with that Evora? Greg took a deep breath, knowing the next few moments could make or break their entire plan. Captain, I'm Lieutenant Gregory Harker, and this is Rigel. We have a lot to explain, and I know it's going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen. Over the next few minutes, Greg and Rigel took turns explaining their situation, the assassination attempt, their crash landing, the alien visitors, and their plan to end the war. Sarah listened, her expression shifting from disbelief to cautious curiosity. So you're telling me there's a whole galactic coalition out there, and we've been fighting this war based on a misunderstanding? Sarah asked, lowering her weapon slightly. Rigel nodded. It's a lot to take in, I know, but we have proof, and more importantly, we have a chance to stop this senseless conflict. Sarah was silent for a long moment, her gaze flicking between Greg and Rigel. Finally, she holstered her weapon. I must be out of my mind, but what do you need me to do? With Sarah's help, they made quicker progress on the transmitter. Her knowledge of human fleet communications proved invaluable, filling in gaps that even Greg's experience couldn't cover. As they neared completion, a new sound cut through the air, the whine of Evora dropships. Greg's heart sank as he recognized the insignia on the lead ship. It's Commander Zax, Rigel said, her voice tight with apprehension. He survived the explosion on our ship. The dropships landed, and a squad of Evora troops poured out, led by the imposing figure of Commander Zax. His alien features were set in a mask of fury as he spotted Rigel standing alongside the humans. Traitor! Zax bellowed, raising his weapon. Surrender now or face the consequences of your betrayal. Greg and Sarah instinctively reached for their own weapons, but Rigel stepped forward, her hands raised in a placating gesture. Commander Zax, please, she said, her voice steady despite the danger. There's so much you don't understand. We've discovered something that changes everything. Zax hesitated, confusion flickering across his features. Explain yourself, quickly. Rigel took a deep breath and began to speak. She told Zax of their experiences, of the alien visitors, and of the greater galactic community waiting beyond their conflict. As she spoke, Greg marveled at the passion in her voice, the way she seamlessly blended scientific fact with emotional appeal. Zax's troops shifted uneasily, murmuring among themselves. Even Zax seemed taken aback by Rigel's impassioned plea. Taking advantage of the distraction, Greg and Sarah made the final adjustments to the transmitter. With a nod from Rigel, Greg activated the device. A pulse of energy surged outward, temporarily disrupting the weapons systems of both fleets. In that moment of forced ceasefire, Greg and Rigel's voices echoed across the battlefield, reaching every ship, every soldier, every leader embroiled in the conflict. They shared their story, laid bare the truths they had uncovered, and issued a challenge to both sides to look beyond their differences and see the vast potential for cooperation and growth. As their broadcast concluded, an eerie silence fell over the planet. Greg, Rigel, Sarah, and Zax stood frozen, the weight of what they had done settling over them like a heavy blanket. Then slowly ships began to descend from the sky. Human and Evora alike, they landed in the clearing around the transmitter. Soldiers emerged, weapons lowered, curiosity and confusion etched on their faces. Greg and Rigel exchanged a look of cautious hope. They had created an opportunity, a chance for real dialogue. But as the crowd grew, they knew that the hardest part of their journey was just beginning. In the fading light of the alien sun, surrounded by former enemies now tentatively reaching out to one another, Greg felt a glimmer of optimism. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Rigel would face them together, united in their vision of a peaceful future among the stars. As the first rays of the alien sun crept over the horizon, Greg and Rigel surveyed the makeshift camp that had sprung up around the crash site. The night had been tense, filled with whispered conversations and wary glances between former enemies. Now, in the pale light of dawn, they faced the monumental task of turning this fragile ceasefire into lasting peace. "We need to establish a neutral zone," Greg said, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "Something to keep everyone on equal footing." Rigel nodded, her alien features set in concentration. "The technology we discovered in the ruins. If we can adapt it, we might be able to create a barrier that neutralizes weapons within a specific area." They set to work immediately, Greg's practical military knowledge complementing Rigel's scientific expertise. As they tinkered with the alien device, Captain Sarah Russell approached, her expression a mix of hope and apprehension. "The fleets are sending down official delegations," she reported. "Admiral Hawthorne himself is coming." Greg's stomach tightened. He knew Hawthorne's reputation as a staunch anti-Evora hardliner. "Any word on who the Evora are sending?" "High Counselor Vexara," Commander Zax's gravelly voice answered as he joined their group. "She's not known for her fondness of humans." The gravity of the situation settled over them. These were not just representatives, but figureheads of the very ideologies that had fueled the war for so long. As the delegation's shuttles descended from orbit, Greg and Rigel activated their modified alien device. A shimmering, translucent dome expanded outward, encompassing a wide area around the crash site. They watched as weapons carried by both humans and Evora powered down the moment they crossed the barrier. The human delegation landed first, a phalanx of armed guards surrounding Admiral Hawthorne as he strode towards the neutral zone. His weathered face was set in a scowl, eyes darting suspiciously between the Evora already present. Moments later, the Evora shuttle touched down. High Counselor Vexara emerged, her ornate robes billowing in the alien wind. Her entourage moved with fluid grace, forming a protective circle around her as they approached. Greg and Rigel stepped forward to meet them at the edge of the neutral zone. "Admiral Hawthorne, High Counselor Vexara," Greg began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Welcome to neutral ground. Before you enter, I must inform you that all weapons will be rendered inert within this zone." Hawthorne's scowl deepened. "You expect us to enter unarmed? With them?" He jerked his head towards the Evora delegation. Vexara's multifaceted eyes narrowed. "For once, I find myself in agreement with the human. This is highly irregular." Rigel stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "This is precisely why we need this measure. We're here to talk, not to fight. The barrier affects all weapons equally. You'll be on equal footing." After a tense moment, both leaders grudgingly agreed. As they crossed the barrier, there was an almost audible sigh of relief as weapons powered down on both sides. The peace talks began in a cleared area at the center of the neutral zone. From the outset, the atmosphere was charged with centuries of hostility and mistrust. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries," Hawthorne growled. "Your kind has been a plague on humanity for generations. The atrocities you've committed—" "Atrocities?" Vexara interrupted, her voice sharp. "You humans have no right to speak of atrocities. We have documented countless instances of your war crimes against our people." Greg and Rigel exchanged a worried glance. This was quickly spiraling out of control. They needed to change the narrative. "If I may," Greg interjected, stepping between the two leaders. "High Counselor Admiral, we've all suffered in this war, but Rigel and I have discovered something that changes everything." He nodded to Rigel, who produced the communication device given to them by the alien explorers. "This is proof that we're not alone in the galaxy. There's a whole coalition of species out there, living in peace." The revelation sent shockwaves through both delegations. Murmurs of disbelief and wonder rippled through the crowd. "Impossible," Hawthorne breathed, his eyes fixed on the alien device. Vexara reached out a tentative hand, her fingers hovering over the strange technology. "If this is true, it changes everything." As Greg and Rigel shared their experiences, the mood in the neutral zone began to shift. The possibility of a larger galactic community forced both sides to reconsider their conflict in a broader context. However, not everyone was swayed by this new perspective. Greg noticed Colonel Victor Graves, a known hardliner, muttering to a group of human soldiers. Similarly, he caught sight of General Kral, an Evora military leader, engaged in hushed conversation with several of his subordinates. Something about their behavior set off alarm bells in Greg's mind. He caught Rigel's eye and saw his concern mirrored in her expression. They needed to investigate, but they couldn't leave the peace talks unattended. Greg pulled Sarah and Zax aside. "We need your help," he whispered, explaining his suspicions. "Can you look into it, discreetly?" Sarah nodded, her eyes sharp. "We're on it. You two focus on keeping the talks from falling apart." As Sarah and Zax slipped away to begin their investigation, Greg and Rigel turned their attention back to the delicate negotiations. The revelations about the galactic community had opened new avenues for discussion, but centuries of mistrust weren't easily overcome. They shared their own experiences of cooperation, demonstrating how a human and an Evora could work together effectively. Their unique partnership became a powerful symbol of what could be achieved through understanding and collaboration. As the sun began to set on the alien world, casting long shadows across the neutral zone, Greg felt a glimmer of hope. The talks were just getting started, and major obstacles remained. But for the first time in generations, humans and Evora were engaging in genuine dialogue. Yet even as progress was made at the negotiating table, unseen forces were at work to undermine everything they had achieved. In the gathering darkness beyond the shimmering barrier of the neutral zone, the true test of their fragile peace was about to begin. In the gathering darkness beyond the shimmering barrier of the neutral zone, the true test of their fragile peace was about to unfold in ways none of them could have anticipated. As the negotiations reached a critical juncture, Greg and Rigel exchanged a meaningful glance. They had come too far to let this opportunity slip away. With a subtle nod to each other, they stepped forward, their united front catching the attention of both delegations. "Admiral Hawthorne, High Counselor Vexara," Greg began, his voice steady and clear. "We stand before you not just as representatives of our respective species, but as living proof of what can be achieved when we set aside our differences." Rigel continued seamlessly, her alien features softening as she spoke. "We propose a bold step forward. Let us create a joint human-Evora colony right here on this planet, a neutral ground where both our peoples can live, work, and learn together." The proposal was met with stunned silence, followed by a wave of murmurs from both sides. Admiral Hawthorne's brow furrowed deeply. "A joint colony? That's unprecedented." "And potentially dangerous," Vexara added, her multifaceted eyes narrowing. But as the initial shock wore off, voices began to rise from the gathered soldiers and delegates. A human sergeant stepped forward, his voice gruff but sincere. "With all due respect, sir, I've seen firsthand what cooperation can achieve. During the last skirmish, an Evora soldier saved my life. An Evora lieutenant joined in, her tendrils quivering with emotion. It's true. I've witnessed acts of kindness from humans that challenge everything we've been taught about them. More stories emerged from both sides. Tales of unexpected alliances, of lives saved, and bonds formed in the crucible of conflict. Greg and Rigel listened, their hearts swelling with hope as the mood in the neutral zone began to shift. Admiral Hawthorne and High Counselor Vexara exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of centuries of hostility visibly lifting from their shoulders. Finally, Hawthorne spoke, his voice gruff but no longer hostile. A ceasefire. We'll agree to a ceasefire and consider this colony proposal. As the words left his mouth, a bright light suddenly illuminated the area. All eyes turned skyward as a sleek, otherworldly vessel descended from the clouds. Greg's heart raced as he recognized the design. It was the ship of the alien explorers who had helped them before. The vessel landed gracefully at the edge of the neutral zone, and three tall, ethereal beings emerged. Their appearance sent a ripple of awe through both human and Evora delegations. One of the aliens stepped forward, its voice resonating in their minds rather than through the air. We have been observing your progress with great interest. Your proposal for peace is commendable, and we wish to offer our support. The alien explained that they represented a vast coalition of peaceful species and offered to act as neutral mediators in the human-Evora negotiations. Moreover, they promised to share some of their advanced technology to help establish the colony under one condition. Both species must commit to peaceful coexistence. This unexpected intervention galvanized the peace talks. With the aliens' guidance and the promise of advanced technology, the negotiations gained new momentum. After days of intense discussion, a historic peace accord was signed. The human-Evora war, which had raged for generations, was officially over. Greg and Rigel found themselves at the center of this monumental change. As the architects of the peace proposal, they were appointed co-leaders of the new colony project. The task ahead was daunting, but they faced it with grit and hope. In the months that followed, the alien planet transformed. The crash site that had once been a battlefield became the foundation of a thriving settlement. Human and Evora engineers worked side by side, combining their technologies in ways that pushed the boundaries of what either species thought possible. Greg watched in amazement as towering structures rose from the alien soil, their architecture a blend of human practicality and Evora organic design. Solar collectors inspired by Evora bioluminescence powered human-designed water purification systems. It was a new world being built before his eyes. Rigel threw herself into organizing cultural exchange programs. Humans learned Evora art forms, while Evora studied human literature and music. The once divisive differences between their species became sources of fascination and mutual respect. Yet challenges remained. Deep-seated prejudices and cultural misunderstandings led to frequent tensions within the colony. Greg and Rigel found themselves not just managing the logistics of the settlement, but also mediating disputes and promoting understanding between their peoples. One evening, as they walked through the bustling central plaza of the new colony, Rigel turned to Greg, her expression uncharacteristically nervous. "Greg, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg's heart skipped a beat, concern flooding his features. "What is it? Is everything okay?" Rigel took a deep breath, her tendrils quivering slightly. "I'm pregnant, Greg. We're going to have a child, a human-Evora hybrid." The world seemed to stop for a moment as Greg processed her words. A child? A hybrid? It was something they had never even considered possible. As the news spread through the colony, reactions were mixed. Some viewed it as a miraculous symbol of unity, while others saw it as an abomination. Greg found himself working tirelessly to ensure Rigel's safety and to promote acceptance of their unborn child. He organized a series of cultural events celebrating the diversity of both species, culminating in a ceremony that combined human and Evora traditions to bless their unborn child. As they stood before the assembled colonists, their hands intertwined, Greg felt a surge of hope for the future they were building. The months passed and Rigel's pregnancy progressed smoothly, defying all scientific expectations. The colony held its collective breath as the day of the birth approached, wondering what this unprecedented child would mean for their future. As the alien sun set on the horizon, bathing the colony in a warm, otherworldly glow, Greg stood by Rigel's side in the medical center. The moment of truth had arrived, and with it, the dawn of a new era for both their species.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.